All right, we're back. Another episode. Drew and Mikael here, and we're gonna do part two of our conversation. Part one was pretty heavy, Mikael focused, so we're just gonna kind of flip the tables, and Mikael's gonna ask me some questions here. So I'll kick it over to you, and you can tee it up however you would like.
So last time we jumped into coaching philosophy and sort of I went into some things that to me make up what I would call my philosophy or how I view um, my coaching tendencies, philosophy, beliefs. Like for you, start off I guess the same spot we started off with me. Like what is your maybe main coaching philosophy or overarching coaching philosophy, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. So mine's kind of changed since I was coaching the junior team as a head coach in 17, 8, no, 18, 19, and 19, 20. Um, and I guess I'll give you kind of the contrast or the growth, to kind of link it back to what you were saying last episode. But um, I didn't, with full admission, I didn't know what I was doing. I was a head coach at 27 years old, and I had had one really good coach who's now my coaching mentor. Um, and he probably coached me for 8 months of my life, for 2 weeks at a time, my first year of junior, and then the last year I played junior, I had an opportunity to kind of just, it was a different feeling, and I'll get into power. It was power. I just didn't know it at the time. But there was such an emphasis on the personal relationship. There was such an emphasis on just delivering his message in a completely different and what I felt better way, from just like a feeling and energy. It felt different. It's kind of hard to explain it, but you know it and you see it and you know it and you hear it. But there was just such a personal touch where, I mean, my college coaches were pretty transactional. My other junior coaches were very transactional. It was just number on a roster. What can you do for me today in terms of hockey perspective? And with Todd, it was so much different. There were those, he'd grab lunch with guys. He'd sit around and talk to you after practice. He'd do extra skill stuff with you. He'd take money out of his own pocket to buy extra ice for us, and get on the ice in a skills setting with us. It was just, it was different. And I tried to emulate a lot of that, in my first year as a head coach. I don't think I did as good of a job as I could have, but live and learn. And you have to start somewhere. But it was always power. I just didn't know it yet. And then when I kind of went through that 4 year self-discovery, writing, creating a personal coaching brand, and just trying to formulate my ideas and kind of figure myself out. I ended up finding Power versus Force, David Hawkins. If you haven't read it, I'll just say you probably won't read it. It's not a coaching book. It's not for everyone. And I'm not saying you personally won't read it. I'm just broader audience. Um, it's tough to get through. It's really tough to get through the audiobook. Don't do that if you're gonna get the hard copy. But anyway, what essentially happens, and I was gonna tie it in right away in the last episode, but I kind of pivoted and kept it about you. So, the the piece that I'll like lay on top of where you started and where our similarities are is that power comes from self-determination theory calibrates in power. And like, to back up a little bit, there's a scale from 1 to 1,000, and everything below 200 is transactional coaching. It's the way you were probably coached. It's the way I was coached, except for with Todd. Um, there's no love present. There's no personal touch. There's no relationship. It's very just do this, extract value from the player, one-sided, top down, um, all of those things. So above 200, the ownership is the word that you use. Agency or courage is 200 on that scale. So they're all kind of the same thing. And at 200 is where love comes in. So ownership, courage, agency, all forms of energy where there is love present. There is a focus on not being a victim, but taking, again, ownership, agency, taking your power that you have back. Um, so that's kind of where the intersections are, and I wanted to lay that, um, especially for you to have this conversation and be able to take what you believe in and what I believe in and see that's kind of the common starting point. And then if you want to dive from there, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of mentioned a little bit of it, or you like touched on it, but what are like when you came across that coach that you're saying was more power based and like was more interested in you individually versus just what can you do for the team? Like, what are things specifically that you like felt and you were like, this is different? Not just things you heard or saw, but like things you felt.
Yeah. It's almost what you don't feel. So like what was very present for me as a player, um, with transactional coaches, like there's a lot of anger that's sent your way. If you don't play well on a weekend, they yell at you and you get bag skated, or you have to like stay after the game and like run stairs, or if you're allowed to get ice after the game, you gotta stay on the ice and you get bag skated, or you get bag skated on Monday and the coach is slamming his stick and mother effing you left, right, and center. And we've all probably at some point, given the state of affairs that coaching is in, we've probably all played for that guy. If you haven't, awesome. Oh, good for you. But you feel all the negative states and like you feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel anger, or you get anger projected at you. Um, there's an element of like pride that comes from the coach, and that stems from like a self-absorption point of view. So like everything is about what can this group do for me? And like something that you're super mindful of, and one of your like pet peeves is when coaches like say, you guys, everything below 200, everything in force, which is the opposite of power. If I haven't mentioned that, is separation. So force is separation, power is unity. And everything that's like felt from the force coach puts you guys further away relationally. I think it puts you further away from the best version of who you are as a player. I think we've talked about like the last episode of last season that my discovery playing for the power coach, playing for Todd, was that there's two ceilings. I was this good with force coaches, and there was this whole other level when I was playing with Todd. Statistically, self-esteem wise, um, on and off the ice, there's just like different unlocks, I call it. It's power unlocks you, and force kind of puts you in this narrow box or limits you or limits your potential. Um, so what you feel and what you don't feel in terms of energy are different with a power coach versus a force coach.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think even what you're saying, I feel like this pertains to a lot of different things. But like, it's not so much what you see, it's what you don't see, or it's not so much what you've done, it's what you haven't done. It's like what you didn't experience let you know or signal to you like this is different. And maybe like the opportunities for that like classic, breaking of the board throwing of the stick moment didn't occur. And it's like, oh, maybe this guy's trying to do things differently, or maybe he just genuinely believes different things than what I've been accustomed to. Those are also things that to me, like as you were talking about them, I'm thinking like they're all just intuitive. They're not necessarily like you couldn't have made this like checklist out prior that like I want to make sure I feel X way or I don't feel Y way. It's more just like you're gonna be in that moment and you're just gonna feel that this is different. And intuitively it's not gonna give the same I keep saying feeling, but it's just
Mhm.
you're not gonna have the same feeling that you would otherwise, or maybe that you would expect to if things were the way they had traditionally been. Um, so I think that that gets to an interesting point of just like it's kind of this like tough thing to put a finger on
Mhm.
and to say like this is exactly the moment I knew he was different or he was trying things differently. It's just like a culmination of events that you're like this is not the same as I'm used to. But it kind of lets you in on like okay, now like I think it makes you more keenly aware as a player or as a coach too. Like it makes you more keenly aware of like where else is this happening? Like where else is he doing something like this that I can pick up on? Um, and that maybe I wouldn't have noticed otherwise if I wasn't thinking about this.
Yeah. I say once you see it, you can't unsee it. And like there's no truer like realization than especially when they're not your last coach. So like if you have to go back, which is what happened to me, like if you play for my experience, you play youth hockey all the way up to high school, first year, junior, force, 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 force. And then for this 1 year out of my 3 years of juniors, I played for power. But then in college, I went back and like we've talked about the like Shangri-La element of like once you exist in this higher energy state, once you're around someone that is secure, cares about you, provides this sort of environment that feels good, that brings joy, that brings your best out of you, and then you go back. Like the two ceilings, you don't stay here. Like you drop. Like just because I was here in juniors and there was this gap, I went right back to that previous ceiling as soon as you go back into that environment. Like the energy in the environment either unlocks you or puts you back into your limited state of being. And like there's ways around that. And like that's a whole nother episode. But um for the most part, like players, especially youth, junior, and even college, like we still call them kids. Like there's a lot of maturing and growing up to do even in college. So like you are a product of the environment that is created and the energy that exists in that environment. And it can either bring the best out of you from a person standpoint, from a human standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, and from a hockey standpoint. So it affects on and off the ice. And it's all by who the person's being. And like, you touched on the difference, like who they're being versus what they're doing. It's not what they're doing. It's not tactics. It's not intentional. This is just who they are. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like that's where a lot of those things they we kind of talked about some of the last episode too, but like they're not necessarily things that like you're trying to do. Like you're just that's just how you act or that's just how you operate. And a lot of that comes down to like another buzzword, but it is true, I think, or accurate here is like it's genuine. Like it's not I'm not like putting on this front or your coach in this scenario. Like he's not putting on this front to be this guy for you or for the players on your team so that you guys like him more or so that you want to play for him more. I think this gets back to like when we were talking about communication and like making sure you touch on or touch base with certain guys or all guys. Like if you have this list that you have to get to, it's not genuine and
Mhm.
it's just like no forced conversation. So it's the same thing here. Like if you have if you want to be a certain way so that guys will trust you or so that players will believe in you, like probably not going to get their trust or belief. If
Mhm.
you just go about being yourself and trying to operate with their best interest in mind or in a way that you feel will be best for the team and best for them individually, like that's probably going to lead to them trusting you and probably going to lead to them believing that you have their best interest in mind. But it gets to like, doesn't matter what you say, it's how you act and what you do. And sometimes I think there's a mismatch in thinking that like, I need to say the right things here. I need to say what they want to hear from me when really like the words don't really matter. It's how you act and what you emulate, who you are. That's really going to be the biggest tell or the biggest difference maker versus the thing you say. Um, yeah, I don't know. That wasn't not a question so much, but just I guess a
Yeah, no,
thought.
I can roll off that. Like the word that I use for what you're describing is non-integrous. It's one of my favorite words to use, especially in our industry. But um players will see through your bullshit. They will. And you have guys that will, not you personally, but like if you have a good enough relationship and like whether it's my current role, whether it's previous roles, like if you are authentic and you can connect with people, you'll learn so much about whether it's a different coach on your staff, whether it's a previous coach they've played for, that your players will tell you everything if you're just, if you care. And it's not if you act like you care, like you're saying. It's not if you show you care. It's if you care. And like they can sniff through the coach was trying to pull one over on us here. Like humans have this innate and like we're losing it a bit, but it's not lost forever and it's not lost permanently and it's not lost at all. It's just maybe decreasing, but like we have the ability to read people's vibes. People call it vibes now, people's intentions. And the best people can see through a lot of stuff. So like if you have coaches that are, I need to say this, but then they don't do it, or there's values on the wall that like you see every day, and then you're like, we've all been players, coaches, and embodying that. Then like the trust, and we've talked about that, like trust loop that you've talked about, it gets broken when when who you're being and the words on the wall that you say you care about don't match, when your culture playbook that you talk to us about and your personal actions as a coach don't match. Non-integrous energy, and players see it, feel it, pick up on it, don't like it, and again, that causes separation. Where if you just are who you are and the values that you put in a culture playbook are actually ones that you believe in and they can see it, that brings unity. So like, are you going this way? Or are you going this way?
What would you say are like the best principles or the best like guiding actions to accomplishing that? Not accomplishing that like unity for the sake of I want them to believe me because I want like approval. But like I genuinely want a cohesive team where there's unity. What are guiding principles to get there? Maybe
Yeah.
not even from a coach's standpoint. It might be from like a player or a leader, or a captain standpoint.
Yeah. I think it's going to be obscure to a lot of people. I think a lot of people might tune out as soon as I say this word, but I'm going to do it. Play. Uh, and I've been thinking about this a lot. My current role this year is a player development coach with a group of 10 to, I think our oldest kid is 15, turning 16. And a lot of really good coaches in Europe have started at the grassroots level. And like, if I, this is a hot take. And again, you can tune out of this episode and go back to listen to me, Kellen, part one again. Uh, but like, if you haven't coached grassroots, you haven't coached. Uh, sit with that for a second. If you're too angry, click off. 3, 2, 1, see you. Um, but like, if you haven't coached grassroots, you haven't coached at all because if you have a group of 10 to 15-year-olds, like you learn energy, you learn what coaching actually is, you learn what environment you have to provide because like if you have a group of kids at the college level, there's just like this expectation. And I get that there's transfer portal and I get it's easier to leave, but there's still like this underlying, like, I need to at least color in the lines enough to, play this year or have a spot in the lineup or not get just written off by my coach for the year, even if I want to transfer. Like, there's just this I'll play by the rules enough. I'll buy in enough so it's not like it's gonna get noticed. And like if you look at a 15-year-old and you provide a drill that like or I don't I just use a drill, like don't do that, Drew. If you provide an activity or a small area game or whatever, or a piece of information in a way that like they don't care about or they don't want to hear or they don't want to do, they're just not gonna do it. So like the feedback is so much more rich, I think, um, when you're coaching with like the constraints of that age group. Um, and that kind of went a little bit left of center. So if you want to reel that back in or if you want to expand
No,
on that, feel free.
no, I think that that point is actually really interesting because it's the feedback of what you're saying is like it's so I think that is probably one of the biggest differences of coaching younger kids versus coaching older kids. Like let's say the difference between coaching college kids and coaching 15-year-olds is like the reality of college, I think no matter what level you're at, is that like guys are there for more than just the hockey, whether it's the academics, social, whatever. There's other factors that go into it. But like for you in your role, the only thing that's bringing them to you is hockey. And so if the activity that you're putting in front of them sucks, they're like not they're younger and they're less afraid of pushback, probably especially at that age, like 15, where you're just like you speak your mind and you think you're untouchable. But also they're only there to deal with the hockey element of things. So if they show up every day in the hockey sucks, they're not going to be afraid to let you know that. If they show up with me every day in the hockey sucks, there's a lot more at stake that involves that their life entails to just leave it. So I think that the reason I say all that is like the feedback loop is so much quicker for you. And I also think by the time I don't think this, I know this, by the time you're 20 or you're even our youngest guys at 18, 19, you know enough that if you don't like something, you can put that face on. Like you think this is absolutely ridiculous, put the face on. Don't show your true emotion because that's inappropriate or disrespectful. You're that age at 15 and you don't like something, your face is going to show it immediately. There's no hiding it. And you don't even necessarily know to hide it. So I like that a lot because I think it's very different between maybe what I'm doing versus what you're doing in terms of like I'm not going to get that same. Oh, I actually find this is probably something that's true of a lot of different coaches and a lot of different colleges, but I actually find that sometimes like our feedback loop is so long that it's too late to make a change. And like we might find something out in the spring once the season's over that wasn't going well that we could have known about sooner. And I often think to myself, like, how can we, I don't want to say force, but how can we like have this conversation sooner
Yeah.
than March or April when it's too late to make a change?
Mhm.
And I feel like we've been getting better at it over time, but there's still like, we can do better even. But for you with what you're talking about, it's like that feedback is so immediate that you don't even have to necessarily do anything and you're already finding out like, oh, this isn't going over well. Like this idea that I had is not landing the way I thought it
Mhm.
would. And now like I guess really for me, like that just makes you so much better for the next time around, whether that's later that day or later that week or in a month. The next time around, you know that previous time didn't go as you planned or just wasn't as good as it could be. And now I need to make an adjustment immediately before I go and try to like run the same thing back. So I like that as far as the feedback because I think it's very true.
Excuse me. Yeah. And like going back, I went on a huge, I'll try and circle back. Like your question was like, what is the principle that like, and this gets back to, I'll tie it back into every level. This is what I would do. I said play in terms of like, what is a principle that like you would try and create this unity around. And like at any level that I'm coaching at, I would take what I'm learning with these 10 to 15-year-olds and I would apply it. Literally, give me a junior team tomorrow, give me a college team tomorrow. Like I've thought about how we might like restructure a training camp from like a play perspective to bring, a team closer together to create that like belonging, togetherness, joy, and like put those players in, you know, that high energy state of love, joy, whatever. And like what I would do with a junior team, I wouldn't, the first day of training camp with my junior team for the first 2 years I ran, I could kick myself for it, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And I thought that's what you were supposed to do. But like I ran super long culture meetings. This is what we're going to be. This is our culture playbook. I'd give them way too much information. I'd give them a Word document or a PDF, whatever it was, and it was 30, 40, 50 pages long. They didn't read it. They didn't care. Um, but like to go through the back door and like speaking about like the embodied and the modeled stuff that you spoke about in the last episode. Like if you can, or not even if you can, like the conditions that you create and play, whether you're playing pickup basketball, whether you're playing a small area game and you're involved as the coach or not, whether you're playing beach volleyball in training camp because it's August and it's 100 degrees outside. Um, if you're in an environment where you're playing with your team, like you can model, and again, not intentionally, if this is who you are and you are above 200 and you believe in ownership and agency and you live those things. Like the biggest way that I've gotten my kids to take accountability this year with our group is to hop in small area games with them. And when I make a turnover, I say my bad. And like I'll go talk to the person I was trying to pass to after, and I'll get close and I'll say, hey, like that's on me. Um, Kind of like what you were saying in your episode, like admitting even the smallest of mistakes, like small area game, tight spacing, a lot of pressure. Everyone's gonna make mistakes, but like for a few months before I made this adjustment, they were just playing amongst themselves and like they would make a mistake and they would scream across the rink and they would bang their stick and they would do what middle school kids do. And you can like previous me would have just been like, hey guys, we can't do this. And I would have told them explicitly, like, this is how we do ownership and this is how we model it and this is why it's important. And like all of it would have went, coach, we don't give a shit. Um, but the best way and the stickiest way that I got it to work, or not work, I got them to improve, I got them to grow as people, was just to get in the game myself, make a mistake, and then say my bad. And then, like, it didn't happen right away, but within a week, we had kids going over, hey, that's my bad, that's on me, that was a bad pass, I was trying this. And like, all of a sudden they start, you know, admitting, owning, not blaming. And then they're also trying to come up with solutions like, oh, I tried this, and like next time, like if I'm making this read, maybe be here, or like I should have found you here, or whatever. And like all of a sudden, solutions start to emerge instead of me explicitly saying, like, all right, guys, we got to be better about ownership. This is how we do it.
Yeah, I think you just hit on something that you and I were actually talking about this the other day, but it warrants it. You brought it up here. Like, it's sometimes it's as simple as not having seen it before and just not knowing. And so players may, as a coach, you can be, you, I have found myself frustrated with like, okay, we want to be more accountable. We're saying we need more accountability, but we're not going out and like doing it. So like, you're a leader on this team or you're an upperclassman on this team and you're aware that we need to, exhibit more accountability or hold ourselves more accountable, then like you're not doing it yourself. And your comment, very similar to what you're saying now, was like sometimes they just need to see it. Like they don't know any better. And not like they don't know any better because they're dumb. It's like imagine like go back to when you were that age and you hadn't seen it before. And then you're like, oh, this is what it looks like. This is how I can do it. And I think for sure it's something where like you sometimes take for granted as a coach or as a leader that like some of those things aren't so intuitive and aren't so obvious. If you haven't seen them before, you don't know. And like, unfortunately, if you haven't been given opportunities like your players are at a younger age to see them, to see those actions exhibited in front of them, they may grow to be the kids that are in college that don't necessarily, they like want to be accountable. Like they genuinely want to hold themselves accountable or hold their teammates accountable, but they don't know how to do it other than, like you said, just yelling across the ice, like that's a bad pass or don't do that, whatever it might be. They don't necessarily realize like the extra effort that's required or the tact that maybe they should have of like going up and having a legitimate conversation, not just like an fu fest. Um, so yeah, I think you're hitting on something that is sometimes it's super simple. I guess what I'm trying to say. It's so
Mhm.
simple, but it sometimes is easily overlooked because you take for granted or you just assume, of course, they know what this looks like. But a lot of times people, players, kids, they really don't. And it just needs to be like shown to them very clearly and then they can improve. And now they're able to actually like emulate it in a way that they weren't able to before.
Yeah. And I think it's as simple as like again, and we don't always think of this and we'll talk about I mentioned a concept from ecological dynamics in the player development space on the last one. We'll eventually get to player development thoughts later this season, but like another thing that you can do with that example of like we have players yelling at each other and like you can pull them all in and say, hey, like we don't do that or whatever. And like with college kids, can you be more explicit? It's like this is a standard and like don't do it. And then they probably won't. Yeah, 100%. But like I don't have that luxury. I'm dealing with a different age group of kids with different constraints. And like what I've tried after racking my brain because we solved the ownership, like we solved the like my bad problem, but we still like had different like conflicts that would go on the ice, heat of the moment stuff, and like we'd still have the yelling across the ice and just not constructively being able to communicate. And I was like, how do we fix this? And it took me a couple weeks, and I was like, what if they just had to be close enough to each other to touch before they were allowed to speak to each other? And when you'll say things from 85 feet across a rink that you'd never say if you're close enough for the person to be able to punch you in the face. You wouldn't. Like most people don't have that courage. And like your conversations will be much more solution oriented and much less like separation. You're a piece of shit. Why did you fucking do that? Whatever. Like if the person can punch you in the face, you're not going to say most of the destructive stuff that you're thinking in your head. So I was like, the new rule, the new constraint is if you want to speak to someone about a play that you didn't like or a rep that you didn't like or whatever, you have to be close enough to touch them and like
Yes, correct.
problem solve. Um, and it's creating more favorable conditions for what you want to happen. And you don't have to be the explicit teacher in front of the classroom telling you like, this is what constructive communication looks like. You can just set conditions, you can set an environment, you can make a rule. And we used to do this as kids all the time. Like, and the problems will start to not going through the front door, but just going around. The problems start to solve themselves, essentially. I mean, the players are doing it, but they're constrained with certain things that create new behaviors. So I've thought a lot about just like, even with older kids, like if you want stuff to be embodied, and I've thought about like improv comedy a lot and like relating that as well. And it pulls on a similar thread of just like, this is the situation, these are the rules, go, and then see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, almost what comes to mind for me is like instead of like enabling certain behavior, you're just removing the ability to do certain things. So like instead of saying like, "Hey guys," instead of yelling, you could try this, and that now like the option to yell is still there. So you just remove the ability for the behavior that you don't want to see to be done. And that's like, okay, now you have to be within touching distance to say anything. Okay, well now the yelling across 85 feet, the F you or like you suck, why would you do that? You could still say that, but you're gonna say you suck to the kid within an arm's length and he could punch you in the face now. Or he could slash you across the knees, like whatever thing that you may not want. And I mean it's this is no different than in coaching. Like it's easy to yell at a guy from up top on the bench when he's on the ice. It's easy to yell at him to do something or to not do something. Would you ever in the office in street clothes, both of you say that exact same thing? You might not. And a probably generally good rule of thumb would be if you wouldn't, don't say it.
Hmm.
But I guess to me, like that rule is like less about what I like about it is it's less about saying like this is the behavior we want to see, and it's more like you said, putting a constraint in to get what we want to see out of it, which is really just, and this is probably a topic for another day at this point, but like the constraints led approach, this is really no different than that. Instead of saying, we want to see goals scored like this, you put constraints in that will allow for more goals to be scored that way or to prioritize goals scored in that way. And now instead of it being a rule that you can only do this, you do anything you want, but you're incentivized to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So yeah, just it reminds me of that.
Yeah. And I think it's like very top of mind for a certain group of coaches to provide that sort of environment on the ice. And again, we'll get into that, and you just did. But I think like the next step, and some coaches are already doing it, I'm not by any means first to take like the CLA off of the ice and into the locker room or into the coffee shop or into the video meeting room. But like I think if you can like not just provide it at practice, but if you can provide it this, communication perspective on the ice or, you know, I mean, conversations get heated in the film room. Conversations get so like how can you, and that's just one example, but like how can you create constraints off the ice as well to just create and accentuate the positive or constructive behavior, whatever word you want to use. Um, how can you create more favorable conditions for your values to just be embodied rather than explicitly saying, this is a 50-page document, let's go through it, let's go through some PowerPoint slides, let's like none of that is embodied. All of that is just taught, and it creates separation. I'm the teacher, you're the student, I'm the coach, you're the player. I think I do this. You guys need to do this. Um, and it just starts to, and then when you see it happen, like when you see that communication on the ice, when you see guys get close enough to touch and then speak to each other like humans instead of keyboard warriors on the internet that hate each other, like then you recognize it and you praise it and you know, you pull them aside at some point and be like, hey, I saw what you did there. Like more of that. That's what we want. That's good. What did you learn from that? What was different than what you would have done a week ago? How did that feel? And then making them conscious of like how they feel. Because again, there's a feeling to screaming at a kid across the ice and then getting screamed at back. And then there's a feeling with like, hey, we just like we're 12 years old, but we just sorted something out that was like really bugging us. Like there's power, no pun intended, there's power in that. But um if you can tune them into like the different feeling too, I think it starts to happen faster than just like taking it from here in like the mind level, but like putting it or like tuning them into like their heart and what that feels like.
Yeah, I think that allows them to like it creates a good feedback loop for them as players or as kids. Like now they understand, oh, okay, like that felt better than maybe I thought, or felt better than the alternative. And now I know the next time if I want the same result, I can do this instead of trying the old way. So it creates like a just like we're talking about feedback loop for a coach and knowing whether this was like a good thing to try, not a good thing, whatever. This creates a positive feedback loop for them as well as kids where they can now in the future use this as like positive information and okay, this is going to work if I do this more often than not. Or even specifically with X teammate, he responded well to this. I should try it with another teammate because the last time I did it, it went well. So it creates like a reinforcement of that behavior, but that also stems from what you said of like you as the coach need to make sure you're like acknowledging it and almost prioritizing that behavior versus the alternative. Like, hey, this is what we want to do. Good job by Jesse to do it instead of you know just passing it over and only calling out the opposite of when you see something you don't want. That positive reinforcement, I think, is equally as important.
100%. Um, is there anywhere else you want to go philosophy wise? I know yours was, we're literally doing this like a half hour after we wrapped the first episode. I had to move locations in the library, got kicked out of a room. But is there anything you want to talk about coaching philosophy wise? We can open it back up to just kind of a back and forth and less uh, Q&A. But is there anything you want to hit on?
I don't think so, honestly. I think we touched on everything I kind of had when you posed the question to me, and then yeah, I feel like going the other way around now, we've been able to dive a little deeper on some of your beliefs too.
Awesome. All right, we will wrap it there then and come at you next week with a little bit different topic. Yeah, like like it. I actually don't like it. Share it with someone if you got value out of it. You don't need the likes. I don't even know if you could like stuff on Spotify, but share the show if you want. If you don't, write us really mean feedback and tell us what you don't like to.